Zane's footsteps made a soft sound on the empty road. The gravel under his boots crunched with each step. It was late and the night was cold, but the quiet made him feel better after working a long 12-hour shift at the factory. He was tired and ready to rest. He walked down the back roads, which was a shortcut that saved him 20 minutes. A small amount of time, but important when his body was sore from work. The moon didn't give much light, but Zane knew the way by heart. He knew the turn by the big oak tree and the bumpy dirt patch just before the open field. But tonight, something felt strange. He heard the soft sound of a car engine in the distance, breaking the silence. Zane stopped and listened carefully. There were headlights shining through the trees up ahead. Someone was out there. Zane hid in the bushes, not wanting any trouble. He had heard too many stories of people like him getting into bad situations. From his hiding spot, he could see a van parked in the clearing, its doors open. There were 3 men. 2 of them were digging a hole in the ground quickly, while one man walked around, watching them. Zane crouched lower, trying not to make a sound. The men were working too fast, like they were trying to hide something. Finally, the digging stopped. The pacing man gave an order, and the 2 diggers lifted a large wooden box and put it in the hole. The sound of the box hitting the ground made Zane shiver. They quickly covered the box with dirt and packed it down hard. After finishing, they grabbed their shovels and jumped into the van. The van drove away, leaving the night silent again. Zane's heart was pounding, and he was scared. He knew he should leave, but he couldn't stop thinking about what they had buried. What did they bury? He whispered, almost afraid to know the answer. He slowly stood up and walked towards the spot where the men had buried the box. His hands were shaking, but he started digging, pushing the dirt aside. It didn't take long to reach the box. It was big and rough, and Zane could tell it didn't belong there. He found a loose edge and tried to open the box. The lid was hard to move, but with some effort, it cracked open. Zane gasped when he saw what was inside. There was a young woman, unconscious, tied up and covered in dirt. She looked pale and hurt. Zane's heart raced. Was she alive? He checked her chest, and to his relief, it was still rising and falling slowly. He whispered, "Hey, can you hear me?" But she didn't respond. Zane was scared, but he knew he had to help her. He untied the ropes around her wrists and ankles, wincing when he saw how tight the ropes had been. She was light, but it was still hard to carry her. He lifted her out of the box and tried to carry her carefully back home. Zane's apartment was close by, but it felt like a long way as he walked with her in his arms. He kept looking around, expecting the men to come back. When he reached his apartment, he rushed inside and laid the woman down on his couch. He didn't know who she was, but he couldn't leave her behind. Outside, the night was still, but Zane couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He gently wiped the dirt and sweat from her face with a wet rag. She had deep cuts on her wrists and ankles, and a bruise on her head. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he knew it was bad. He sat next to her and said, "You're lucky I found you," but he didn't know if she could hear him. He kept glancing at the door, feeling like the men might come looking for them. What if they thought he was part of what had happened to her? He didn't know what to do. The woman was all over the news, and her family was looking for her. Her name was Serena Bellamy, and she had been missing for days. Zane looked at her, his heart racing. She had been buried in that box, and he had saved her. But now he was worried. What if people thought he was the one who had hurt her? Finally, hours later, Serena started to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked confused. Zane said, "It's okay. You're safe. I found you in a box. You were hurt, but I brought you here." Serena looked around, scared. "Where am I?" "You're in my apartment," Zane said gently. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to take you to the hospital because you're all over the news. They might think I hurt you." Serena's face showed that she understood. She whispered, "Thank you." Zane didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. He told her she should rest, and she sank back into the couch, crying quietly. Zane sat on his bed, thinking about everything that had happened. Whoever had done this to her wasn't going to stop looking for her. The next morning, Serena was awake and sitting up. Zane asked her how she was feeling, and she said, "Alive." She told him more about what happened to her. She had been at a party for her father's company when she saw 2 men waiting for her. They grabbed her and made her unconscious. When she woke up, She was locked in a basement. The men had been talking, arguing about something she didn't understand. Zane listened carefully, his worry growing. What were the men arguing about? Serena's face tightened, and she looked worried. Zane didn't know what was happening, but he heard one of the people say it was her fault that she saw too much. Zane's throat felt dry, and he looked at Serena. She looked back at him for the first time, and she said, "I saw a murder." Zane stared at her, shocked. The air between them felt heavy, like the words she said were so serious. "A murder?" Zane asked slowly, as if saying it out loud would make it less scary. Serena nodded and hugged her knees tightly. "It's coming back in pieces," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know where I was. I think it was an office or a warehouse, but I saw them kill a man. There was blood everywhere. Then they saw me." Zane put his hand on his face, his mind spinning. "You said you were at your dad's gala. So who?" Serena looked far away, like she was remembering something. "Nathan Harlow," she whispered. "I remember his name." Zane froze, surprised. "Harlow? The businessman who was murdered?" Serena nodded. "They found him 2 days ago," Zane said quickly. "The police said it was suspicious, but they didn't mention witnesses." Serena lowered her voice. "I saw it happen. That's why they took me." Zane's mind raced. "They buried you to keep you quiet," he said, his voice sad. Serena nodded again, trembling. "And now you're involved too." Zane knew she was right. Whoever these people were, they wouldn't stop looking for her, and now they would come after him too. "Maybe you should have left me there," Serena said bitterly. Zane shook his head. "I couldn't do that. I saw what they did to you. You think I could just let you die out there?" Serena looked away, but her face softened. Zane stood up and paced the room. "We need to figure this out. You can't go home, and I can't let those people find you again." Serena glanced at him, a little more trust in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Zane paused. "Because no one else did, and you didn't deserve this." Serena looked at him, feeling a little better. "Okay," she whispered. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through the blinds. Zane looked outside and saw a black car with tinted windows across the street. "That's the third time this morning," he said quietly. Serena looked up from the cereal Zane had made for her. "What? Is it them?" Zane turned to her. "Stay here. I'll be back." "Where are you going?" "Just checking," Zane said, trying to sound calm. Serena's eyes widened. "You think it's them?" Zane didn't answer, just nodded. "Stay away from the window." Zane left the apartment and walked carefully to the street, pretending to check his phone. The black car started up and drove away quickly. Zane hurried back upstairs. "They're watching us," he said when he returned. "They know you're alive." Serena's face turned pale. "What are we going to do?" "We need to figure it out. For now, don't leave the apartment." The day passed slowly, with both of them sitting in silence. Serena asked Zane, "Do you live here alone?" "Yeah," he replied. "Since I was 17. "That's young," she said. "Yeah. My parents died in a car accident," Zane explained. Serena looked sorry for him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It's life," Zane shrugged. "You just keep going." Serena looked at him. "That's awful." "Life doesn't stop for anyone," Zane said. "I worked hard to make a living." Serena sighed. "I've never worked. My dad's company was everything, but I didn't feel close to him. And Derek, my stepbrother, we don't get along." Zane nodded. "You can have everything, but still feel alone." "Yeah," Serena said softly. "It's not always what it seems." Later that night, Zane heard a sound. Someone was outside the apartment. He jumped up, heart racing. Serena looked at him, worried. "What is it?" Zane grabbed a wrench and motioned for her to stay quiet. There was a noise at the door. Someone knocked and then kicked the door in. "Who's there?" Zane shouted. The door splintered and 2 men rushed in, wearing hoods. Zane swung the wrench, hitting one of them, but the other man tackled him. Zane's head hit the floor, and everything blurred. "Serena, run," he shouted. Serena scrambled toward the window, climbing down the fire escape. Zane followed, but the men were right behind them. They ran down an alley, trying to lose them. After a while, they stopped, catching their breath. "We can't stay here," Zane said. "Where do we go?" Serena asked. Zane looked determined. "We'll figure it out." They hurried to a bus station and bought tickets to leave the city. As they sat on the bus, Serena asked, Do you think we lost them? Zane nodded. Yeah, we're good. But the black car was still following them, just a few streets away. It wasn't over. At a motel, Zane and Serena hid out for a while. But soon, the danger caught up to them again. Men came into their room, and they had to escape quickly. Zane tried to fight, but they took Serena, dragging her into the car and driving off. Zane was left behind, battered and hurt. He struggled to get to his feet and ran, looking for help. He found a man named Jake, who agreed to help him find Serena. Please, Zane begged. I need your help. I remember part of the license plate. It's a black SUV, and I saw the number L5P. Jake frowned, but started working on finding the car. I'll help you, he said, but this better not be illegal. It's not, Zane said. She's in danger. Jake typed quickly, looking for the car's location, and Zane waited, hoping to find Serena before it was too late. Zane looked at Jake with a mix of surprise and worry. What did you just say? He asked. I said what I said, Jake replied coldly. They buried her alive. I pulled her out. They're coming after us because she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Zane felt his heart race. He couldn't stop thinking about Serena's face when they dragged her away. Jake swore again and quickly turned back to the computer screen. All right, I've got something. A black SUV with a partial plate number L5P. Let me look it up. The room went quiet except for the sound of keys clicking on Jake's keyboard. Zane pressed a rag to his lip, trying to stop the bleeding. He couldn't stop thinking about Serena, terrified when they took her. After a few minutes, Jake said, I found it. The SUV is registered to a fake company. The last signal came from a warehouse outside town. Zane sat up, ignoring the sharp pain in his side. That's where she is. I'm going to get her. Jake raised an eyebrow. You can barely walk. What are you going to do? Knock on the door and ask them to let her go. I'll figure it out, Zane said, struggling to stand. I'm not leaving her behind. Jake rubbed his face and sighed. You're crazy. Fine. I'll come with you. You'll probably get yourself killed if I don't. He threw the car keys at Zane. Zane caught the keys, his eyes showing thanks. Thanks, man. Jake grumbled. Don't thank me yet. We're probably both going to die. The car bounced along the dark road. Zane stared at the GPS on Jake's phone. The red dot on the map showed they were getting closer. You sure this is the place? Jake asked. It has to be, Zane muttered, not slowing down. We don't have time to second guess. Jake slowed the car and pulled off the road, stopping in front of a big, dark building. Now what? He asked. Get Serena. Get out, Zane said, his voice firm. Jake chuckled. Simple. I like it. They both stepped out of the car and hid in the shadows, the sound of machines humming in the distance. Zane gripped the crowbar Jake gave him, his heart racing. I'm coming, Serena, he whispered. Inside the warehouse, Serena woke up cold and scared. She realized she was tied to a wooden chair. Her wrists hurt from the rough ropes, and her head ached. She tried to pull at the ropes, but they wouldn't budge. Don't bother, a cold voice said. Serena froze. It was Derek. He stepped out of the shadows, his hands in his coat pockets. His face was blank, but his eyes were cold. You're awake, he said. That's a shame. Derek, Serena whispered, her voice shaking. You did this to me? Derek tilted his head, a sneer on his lips. What did you think would happen? You saw something you weren't supposed to see, and now you're in my way. I don't understand, Serena gasped. Derek stopped pacing and looked at her with cold eyes. Do you know what Harlow found out? He uncovered some illegal stuff I'm involved in, but he was too nosy. He threatened to go to the police. You killed him, Serena gasped. Derek nodded. I did. And you saw it, so you had to go too. Serena shook her head, tears in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Because of you, Derek said coldly. You and your mother always took my father's attention, and now you're the last thing stopping me from everything I deserve. I'm not stopping you, Serena said through her tears. It doesn't matter anymore, Derek sneered. Once you're gone, I'll have everything. Serena's heart sank. You won't get away with this. Derek grinned. I already have. No one will ever know what happened to poor little Serena Bellamy. He turned and walked toward the door. Goodbye, Serena, he said before slamming the door shut, leaving her alone in the cold warehouse. Serena pulled at the ropes again, but they wouldn't come loose. She heard footsteps. Someone was coming. Then she saw him. Zane. He came out of the darkness, moving quietly toward her. His clothes were dirty, and he had a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were determined. Zane, Serena whispered. He knelt beside her, pulling a knife from his pocket. We need to hurry. Can you walk? Yes, Serena said, her voice shaking. How did you? We don't have time to talk, Zane said, looking around. Let's get you out of here. He cut the ropes and helped Serena stand. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Serena's heart pounded in her chest as they sneaked past metal crates and boxes. But just as they reached the door, someone shouted, Stop! The warehouse exploded with noise. Shouts, footsteps, and the sound of a gun being cocked. Run! Zane shouted, pushing Serena toward the exit. One of the men grabbed Serena's arm, but she screamed and kicked. Zane swung the crowbar, hitting the man hard. He fell to the ground. Keep moving, Zane yelled as they rushed outside into the cold night. The yard in front of the warehouse was empty, but headlights flashed in the distance. That's Jake, Zane yelled, pointing to the car. The warehouse doors slammed open. Derek's men rushed out, shouting and firing guns. Zane ducked and pulled Serena with him, running for the car. Bullets whizzed past, hitting metal pipes and sending sparks flying. The car screeched to a halt just as they reached it. Jake threw open the door. Get in. Zane shoved Serena inside and jumped into the back seat. Go, 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 Zane shouted. Jake stepped on the gas, and the car shot forward, tires screeching. A bullet hit the back window, shattering it into glass. Are they following us? Jake asked, panicking. Zane twisted around to look through the broken window. I think we lost them. Serena curled up in the front seat, hugging herself. Tears streamed down her face. Zane leaned forward. You're safe. You hear me? You're safe. Serena looked at him. Not until Derek pays for this. Zane nodded. He will. I promise. The car sped into the night, leaving the danger behind. Back at Jake's apartment, Serena sat in front of a webcam. She looked scared but determined. Zane stood nearby, watching her closely. You sure about this? Jake asked. Once we go live, there's no going back. I'm sure, Serena said. It's time. Everyone needs to know what Derek did. Jake hit a few keys on the computer. All right, you're live in 3, 2. Serena took a deep breath and looked directly at the camera. My name is Serena Bellamy. 4 nights ago, I was kidnapped and buried alive. I'm lucky to be alive to tell this story. The man who did this is Derek Blackwood, my stepbrother. He killed a businessman named Nathan Cross and tried to kill me because I saw it happen. He buried me to silence me, but I survived. And now, I'm telling everyone what he did. I'm asking for help. If you know anything about Derek Blackwood or his associates, go to the police. This man is dangerous, and he needs to be stopped. The screen went dark as Jake turned off the feed. The room was silent. Serena breathed heavily, her body trembling. You did good, Zane said softly. Let's hope it's enough, Serena whispered. Soon, the phone started buzzing. Jake's computer lit up with notifications. It's everywhere, Jake said, looking at the screen. The video's gone viral. Serena looked at the screen. News stations were already talking about the story. Photos of Derek filled the screen, and the video of Serena's plea played on repeat. Do you think he's seen it? Jake asked. He has, Jake said, smiling. Or his guys have. Derek can't hide now. Good, Zane said, nodding. But then Jake turned serious. You know this makes us targets too, right? Derek will be desperate now. I'm not scared anymore, Serena said firmly. Zane nodded with respect. You're different now. By the afternoon, the police were involved. Serena's family lawyer contacted them, and they began to make a plan. Derek has to think the meeting is real, the detective explained. We'll trick him into thinking he can silence Serena once and for all. Jake looked at the detective. So, I'll be the bad guy, right? I'll pretend to sell her out. You're volunteering to hand me over? Serena asked, shocked. I'm not handing you over, Jake said with a grin. I'll make it look like I caught you. Derek will believe it. He thinks everyone has a price. I'm not doing this alone, Serena said firmly. I'm going with you. The detective hesitated, but Serena was determined. He needs to see me. Zane clenched his fist but agreed. We'll keep you safe. Later, Jake sat at the kitchen table with a burner phone in his hand. He dialed Derek's number. "What do you want?" a rough voice answered. "I've got something you want," Jake said. "The girl, Serena. I know who she is." Derek paid a lot of money to fix his problems. There was silence. Then a sharp voice asked, "Where is she?" Jake smiled and looked at Serena and Zane. "Relax, she's fine, but I'm not giving her to you for free. $10,000 in cash, and I'll bring her to you at midnight at the old shipping yard off Route 9. You want her or not?" The man growled. "You think you can play us?" Jake answered calmly, "I think you have a problem, and I have the solution. Do you want her or not?" The man paused for a moment and then agreed. "Fine. Derek will meet you there. Come alone. If you're lying." Jake cut him off. "You'll see." The call ended with a sharp click. Jake tossed the phone onto the table with a satisfied grin. "They bought it," he said. Zane sighed, feeling a little relieved. "It's on now." Serena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both determined and scared. "This has to work," she whispered. Jake nodded and grabbed his keys. "Don't worry. It's showtime." The old shipping yard was full of old, rusty containers and broken machines. The moonlight made everything look spooky. The only sounds were the creaking of metal in the wind. Zane crouched behind a stack of crates with Serena and Jake. His hands were tied around a crowbar, hoping it wouldn't come to that. Serena, wearing an old hoodie and jeans, stayed low, looking nervous but determined. "Showtime," Jake whispered, pointing toward the far entrance. From the shadows, Derek appeared, walking confidently with 3 men in dark suits. He looked calm, almost smug, as the moonlight lit up his sharp features. But his eyes were cold and dangerous. "You really pulled her out of the dirt," Derek said, his voice echoing as he walked closer. "I didn't expect anyone to be so smart." Jake stepped forward and shrugged, pretending to be indifferent. "Like I said, 10 grand and she's yours." He pointed toward the shadows, where Serena was supposed to be hidden. "Now where's my money?" Derek raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Do you really think I'm going to give you money for something that should have been dealt with days ago?" Jake tensed, standing firm. "A deal's a deal," he said. Derek raised a hand to signal his men. "Kill him and bring me the girl." But before they could draw their weapons, shouting filled the air. "Freeze! Police! Drop your weapons!" Floodlights turned on, making everything bright and chaotic. Red and blue lights flashed as police officers rushed in, guns drawn and shouting commands. Derek's confident attitude shattered. He turned around, panic in his eyes, while his men scattered, only to be tackled and arrested. The police moved quickly, taking control of the situation in seconds. "Get your hands off me," Derek shouted, his face twisted with anger as 2 officers forced him to his knees. "Do you know who I am?" Serena stepped out from the shadows, her face serious. "You tried to bury me," she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "But you failed." Derek sneered, but his eyes showed fear. "This isn't over," Serena replied coldly. "Oh, it is. You're done." The officers dragged Derek to his feet, reading him his rights, and shoved him into a squad car. Zane let out a long breath, standing nearby. "It's over," he said quietly. Serena nodded, some relief showing on her face. "Yeah, it's over." The Hayes estate was huge, with tall gates glowing in the golden afternoon sunlight. Zane parked his old car near the driveway and stared at the big house. "This is her house?" he asked. Jake nodded, looking up at it. "Man, I should have charged a finder's fee." Zane gave him a look. "Not the time." Serena stood by the car, nervously clutching her hands together. "I haven't seen my dad in days. He probably thinks I'm dead." Zane gave her a reassuring nod. "He'll be glad to see you." Serena took a deep breath and walked toward the front door. Zane followed a few steps behind, quietly supporting her. The door opened, and her father, Franklin Bellamy, appeared. His face was pale, as if he had aged years since she disappeared. When he saw Serena, his face changed, full of disbelief and hope. "Serena," he whispered. "Dad," she whispered back. Before anyone could say anything more, Franklin rushed toward her and hugged her tightly. "I thought I lost you," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "They told me you were gone." Serena held on to him, tears finally falling from her eyes. "I'm here, Dad. I'm here." Franklin pulled back, cupping her face gently, making sure she was real. "How is this possible? The police couldn't find you. Then I saw the video on the news." Serena looked down for a moment. "Derek killed Nathan Harlow and tried to kill me," she said firmly. Franklin staggered back, looking shocked. "My own son," he said, covering his face. "How didn't I see it?" Serena placed a hand on his arm. "It's over now, Dad." Franklin straightened up and looked past Serena at Zane, who was still standing by the car. "Who is this?" he asked. Serena turned to Zane. "This is Zane," she said softly. "He saved me. I wouldn't be here without him." Franklin walked toward Zane and extended his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Zane shook his hand firmly. "You don't need to, sir." Franklin looked at Zane, noticing his torn clothes and tired face. "You risked your life for her. I owe you everything." Later that evening, as the sun set, Serena found Zane sitting quietly on the back patio, looking at the beautiful garden. "My father wants to repay you," Serena said as she walked toward him. Zane shook his head with a small smile. "I don't want his money." Serena sat next to him. "It's not about the money. He wants to help you." Zane looked at her, his face thoughtful. "I don't need anything. I'm just glad you're safe." Serena's eyes softened. "You've spent your whole life helping others, Zane. When was the last time someone helped you?" She reached in her pocket and pulled out an envelope. "My father wants to pay for your education," she said gently. "Full tuition, anywhere you want to go." Zane's eyes widened. "What?" Serena smiled. "You told me you had dreams. Now's your chance." Zane stared at the envelope, his throat tight. For years, dreams had seemed impossible. But now, take it, Serena urged. "For once, let someone give back to you." After a long pause, Zane nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Serena smiled softly. "You earned it." Zane looked out at the garden, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. For the first time in a long time, a future that once seemed impossible felt closer. The courtroom was full of nervous whispers as people filled the benches. Sunlight streamed in through the big windows, casting shadows across the room. Derek Blackwood sat at the defendant's table, stiff and nervous. His face looked tired, his eyes darting around. Serena sat next to her father in the front row, holding his hand tightly. Zane sat further back, watching quietly. The trial had been long, with lots of evidence showing how guilty Derek was. Serena's video had started it all. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, stood up and spoke. "Derek Blackwood thought he was above the law," she began. "He murdered Nathan Harlow to cover up his crimes. Then he kidnapped his own stepsister, Serena Bellamy, and buried her alive just to keep her quiet. He thought he could get away with it, but he didn't. Serena survived, and now we can all see the truth." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not wanting to look at Serena. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "Don't let Derek Blackwood escape justice. The evidence is clear. Hold him accountable." She sat down, and the courtroom went silent. Derek's lawyer tried to argue, but it was clear that Derek was guilty. The jury took only 2 hours to decide. When they came back, the room went quiet. The jury foreman stood and announced, "We find Derek Blackwood guilty of murder, kidnapping, and attempted murder." The room gasped. Derek's shoulders slumped, his face filled with defeat. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of ever getting out. Serena let out a slow breath, tears filling her eyes. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, looking both sad and relieved. Derek was taken away in handcuffs, his eyes briefly meeting Serena's. There was no anger left in them, just a deep sense of defeat. As they left the courtroom, Serena turned to Zane. "It's over," she said softly. Zane nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yeah, it is." The next day, Zane sat in a college library, surrounded by books and notes. His professor walked over and handed him back a paper. "Excellent work, Zane," she said with a smile. "Keep this up, and I'll see you on the dean's list." Zane smiled faintly. "Thank you, ma'am." After the professor left, Zane looked down at his paper. There was a big A at the top. For the first time, he felt proud of himself. He had a future now, a future he never thought was possible. Zane packed up his things and left the library, walking through the campus toward the exit. As he walked, he smiled a little. This wasn't just college for him. It was a chance to make his dreams come true. That evening, Zane sat on a bench in the park, watching the sunset. Serena appeared, looking radiant in the soft light. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sitting next to him. "You're right on time," Zane said with a faint smile. They sat quietly, watching the sky turn different colors. Serena spoke after a moment. "I heard you did great in your first term." Zane chuckled. "Yeah, I did. Trying not to let anyone down." Serena turned to face him, smiling gently. "You're not letting anyone down. You never have." Zane looked at her, really looked at her. "It still feels unreal sometimes," he admitted. "Like any minute, it could all go away." Serena smiled softly. "It won't. You've earned every bit of this." She paused, her voice quieter. "You didn't just save my life, Zane. You gave me hope again. I've been surrounded by people my whole life, but I never felt like I had anyone to trust. You changed that." Zane hesitated before meeting her eyes. "You saved me too, Serena. After my mom and dad died, I lost hope, but you gave me something to believe in." The sun finally set, leaving a soft glow in the sky. Serena smiled, the first stars twinkling above them. "Looks like we saved each other," she whispered. And for the first time in their lives, the future felt bright. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.